I'm astronaut Charlie Duke. Many years ago, I was one of the 12 guys that walked on the moon. I love country music, and back in those days, I had a real good friend who was a disc jockey at KIKK in Pasadena, Texas. His name was Bill Bailey.
We didn't stop going to the moon because of money. We stopped and never fully explained why. If it was the greatest achievement in human history, why did we walk away so quietly? This isn't about aliens or wild conspiracy theories. It's about Charles Moss Duke Jr., Air Force Brigadier General, engineer, and the 10th man to walk on the moon. Before that,
12 men to ever walk on the moon. He did it at the youngest age of any of them, at 36 years old.
he was the steady voice guiding Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin to the surface. A man of science, a man of precision. And yet, when he came back, something about the story never quite settled. Because sometimes the real mystery isn't what was discovered on the moon. It's why the silence afterward feels so deliberate. The man behind the mission. To understand why the things attributed to Charles Duke carry weight, you first have to understand who Charles Duke actually is. Because context matters, credibility matters. And in a world drowning in misinformation, the source of a story is everything. Charles Duke was born in Charlotte, North Carolina in 1935. He grew up in the era of propeller planes and graduated into the age of jets. He earned his degree from the United States Naval Academy, then a master's in aeronautics from MIT, one of the most rigorous engineering programs on the planet. He wasn't a dreamer. He was a builder, a problem solver, a man who thought in equations and thrust vectors and orbital mechanics. He became a fighter pilot, then a test pilot.
A fighter pilot in Germany when the first cosmonauts and astronauts were launched into space, and then I began to dream about
the kind of person who climbs into experimental aircraft that have never been flown before and pushes them to the edge of their design limits, knowing full well that a single miscalculation could be the last one. Night test pilots don't survive on luck. They survive on precision, on training, and on an almost inhuman ability to remain calm when everything around them is falling apart. NASA selected Duke as an astronaut in 1966 as part of the 5th group of astronauts. He wasn't chosen because he was photogenic or charismatic. He was chosen because he was exceptional. Even among the already extraordinary pool of military pilots and engineers that NASA recruited from, Duke stood out. His first major role came during Apollo 11 in July 1969. As Capcom, the capsule communicator, Duke was the sole voice link between mission control and the crew. When Armstrong reported that the Eagle had landed, it was Charlie Duke's voice that responded, crackling with barely contained emotion. Then he was 23 seconds away from watching 2 men die on live television, and he held it together. That's the kind of man he is. 3 years later, in April 1972, Duke got his own chance. Apollo 16, the Descartes Highlands. For 71 hours, he and Commander John Young lived and worked on the lunar surface, driving the lunar rover across terrain no human had ever seen, collecting samples, conducting experiments. Duke spent over 20 hours outside the lunar module walking on the moon, 20 hours in another world. Think about that. Think about what that does to a person. The silence, the horizon that curves too sharply, the sky that is black even in daylight, the earth, small and blue and impossibly fragile, hanging in that void above you. Duke came home a changed man. Many astronauts did. Some turned to art. Some turned to philosophy. Some turned to religion. Duke himself became a deeply committed Christian in the years following his mission. And some began to speak quietly and carefully about things they experienced that didn't make it into the official reports. This is where our story gets interesting. The lunar anomalies. What we know for certain. The moon is a strange place. Not strange in a science fiction way, strange in a scientific way. It is geologically bizarre. Its origin story, most likely formed from a cataclysmic collision between Earth and a Mars-sized body, is violent and extraordinary. Its far side looks dramatically different from its near side, and scientists still debate why. It is tidally locked to Earth, always showing us the same face, as if it has something to hide. Its gravitational influence shapes our tides, destabilizes our axial tilt, and may have been essential for the development of life itself. And the experience of being there? Every astronaut who walked on the moon has described it as profoundly, almost disturbingly alien. Not because of what they saw, but because of what they felt. The silence is the thing that comes up again and again. Not ordinary silence. Not the silence of a quiet room or a remote forest. A silence so absolute, so total, that it becomes a physical presence. There is no atmosphere on the moon, which means there is no sound at all outside the suit. No wind, no rustling, no distant hum of life. Just nothing. An absence so complete it presses against the mind. Several astronauts have described a feeling of being watched, of sensing a presence. Now, and this is important, let me be very clear about what that likely is. The human brain evolved in environments full of stimuli. When you remove all external input, sound, wind, the subtle vibrations of a living world, the brain doesn't just go quiet. It starts generating its own signals. It starts looking for patterns that aren't there. It fills the void with phantoms, because evolution taught us that the cost of imagining a predator that doesn't exist is far lower than the cost of missing one that does. This is well-documented psychology. Sensory deprivation studies have shown that people placed in isolation tanks begin to hallucinate within hours. They hear voices, they see shapes, they feel presence. The moon is, in many ways, the ultimate isolation tank. A vast, silent, airless world where the only sounds you hear are your own breathing and the voice of Houston in your ear. So when stories circulate, stories attributed to Duke and others, about strange lights on the horizon, about feelings of time distortion, about moments where the lunar landscape seemed almost too geometric, too ordered, too deliberate, we have to hold two things in our minds simultaneously. The first, these men were among the most psychologically screened, most mentally disciplined humans ever to live. They were not prone to fantasy. They were not easily spooked. If they said they experienced something unusual, that experience was real to them. The second, they were also human beings, operating under extraordinary physical and psychological stress, in the most alien environment any human has ever entered. Their perceptions...
The worst thing you can do is ignore any potential risk from alien technology.
No matter how vivid, were filtered through brains that evolved for African savannas, not lunar highlands. Both of these things can be true at the same time. And that's what makes this story so fascinating and so difficult to resolve. Some accounts suggest Duke and other astronauts noticed unusual light phenomena during their time on the surface, flashes of light that didn't correspond to any known source. Now, we know that cosmic rays, high-energy particles from deep space, can interact with the human retina and create the sensation of light flashes. This was actually studied during Apollo missions and confirmed. It's physics, not paranormal activity. But some descriptions go beyond what cosmic ray flashes would explain. Descriptions of sustained glows near the horizon, of lights that seemed to move, of illumination in areas that should have been in complete shadow. Were these real? Were they optical illusions caused by the extreme contrast between lunar light and shadow, a contrast far more severe than anything we experience on Earth? Were they reflections off dust particles suspended by electrostatic charge, a phenomenon scientists have since identified as a real feature of the lunar environment? Or were they something else? I don't know, and I want to be honest with you about that. The responsible answer is probably natural phenomena that we understand better now than we did in 1972. But the honest answer is also that some of these accounts have never been fully explained to everyone's satisfaction. And that gap, that small, persistent gap between what we know and what was reported, is where the mystery lives. The structures question. Now we enter more controversial territory. And I want to be upfront about that, because I respect your intelligence too much to pretend this section is anything other than what it is. Speculation, pattern recognition, and the very human tendency to see meaning where there may be none. Over the decades since Apollo, various researchers, amateur astronomers, and self-described anomaly hunters have pored over thousands of lunar photographs, images taken by Apollo missions, by the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter, by Clementine, and by other spacecraft. And some of them claim to have found something extraordinary: structures, geometric formations, right angles where nature supposedly doesn't produce right angles, towers, walls, what some have called ruins. Let me show you what I mean, without showing you what I mean. Imagine you're looking at a photograph of the lunar surface. It's gray. It's covered in craters and boulders and the tracks of ancient lava flows. And then, in one corner of the image, you notice something. A shadow that falls at an unusual angle. A ridge that seems too straight. A cluster of rocks that, if you squint, almost looks like it was arranged deliberately. Your brain lights up, because your brain is a pattern recognition machine. It's the same neural hardware that lets you see faces in clouds, animals in rock formations, and the Virgin Mary in a piece of toast. Scientists call it pareidolia, and it's not a flaw. It's a feature. It's one of the most powerful cognitive tools humans possess. It just happens to misfire sometimes. And especially when we're looking at low-resolution images of unfamiliar terrain. And this is the core problem with the lunar structures hypothesis. Every single photograph that has been put forward as evidence of artificial structures on the moon can be explained by natural geological processes, lighting conditions, image compression artifacts, or pareidolia. Every single one. But here's the thing that keeps the question alive, and why serious people, not just conspiracy theorists, continue to discuss it. We have only explored a tiny fraction of the lunar surface in person. Apollo missions visited 6 locations, all on the near side, all relatively close to the lunar equator. That's like landing on 6 beaches and claiming you've explored all of Earth. The overwhelming majority of the moon, including the entire far side, on the polar regions and vast stretches of the near side, has only been seen from orbit. And orbital photography, no matter how good, has limits. We also know, because science tells us this, that the moon has a more complex geological history than we once believed. There are lava tubes large enough to contain entire cities. There are magnetic anomalies that we can't fully explain. There are areas where the crust is thinner or thicker than models predict. None of this is evidence of artificial structures. Let me be absolutely clear about that. But it is evidence that we don't know everything about the moon, not even close. And in that gap between what we know and what we don't, questions are not only allowed, they're necessary. And some of the claims attributed to Duke and other astronauts suggest they saw things during their missions that they struggled to explain. Formations that looked, from certain angles, almost deliberate. Geometry that seemed too clean for a world shaped only by impacts and volcanism. Did they actually say these things? Some quotes have been verified. Others have been paraphrased, embellished, or outright fabricated by people with agendas. The internet has a way of turning a cautious observation into a definitive declaration, especially when the original speaker is too dignified to engage in public arguments about what they did or didn't say. So I'll leave you with this. The photographs exist. The moon exists. The questions exist. What you see in them, that's up to you. Why did Apollo end? This is the part of the story where we have to talk about history. Real history. Documented, verifiable, unglamorous history. Because if we're going to ask why we stopped going to the moon, We owe it to ourselves to start with the answers we actually have before reaching for the ones we want. The Apollo program didn't end in mystery. It ended in bureaucracy. By 1970, NASA's budget was in freefall. At its peak during the mid-1960s, NASA consumed roughly 4.4% of the federal budget.
NASA faces $3 billion in possible budget cuts. The White House is reviewing the entire manned space program,
An almost incomprehensible figure by today's standards. By the time Apollo 16 flew in 1972, that number had dropped to around 1.6% and was still falling. The Vietnam War was hemorrhaging money. The American economy was struggling with inflation. The public, which had been riveted by Apollo 11, had grown remarkably bored with subsequent missions. Apollo 13 got attention only because it nearly ended in disaster. By Apollo 15, the TV networks weren't even carrying live coverage anymore. Think about that. Humans were walking on the moon, and America had changed the channel. Apollo missions 18, 19, and 20 were all planned. Hardware had been built.
Apollo 11 has very simply been given the mission of carrying men to the moon.
Crews were being trained. Saturn V rockets were sitting in warehouses. But the Nixon administration made a cold political calculation. The moon had been won. The Soviets had been beaten. The space race was over. Continuing to spend billions of dollars to collect rocks, that's how it was framed politically, was an expense the country couldn't justify while soldiers were dying in Southeast Asia and cities were burning at home. So Apollo 17, in December 1972, became the last mission.
On December 19, 1972, Apollo 17 splashed down in the Pacific.
Gene Cernan became the last man to walk on the moon, and the greatest exploration program in human history was mothballed. That's the historical record. That's what happened. But the historical record is not the same as the whole story. And this is where the speculation begins, because there are people, some of them credible, some of them not, who have looked at the speed with which Apollo was canceled and asked, was it really just about money? The hardware was built. The rockets existed. The marginal cost of flying one more mission was a fraction of what had already been spent. Yes, budgets were tight. But was that the only reason? Some have pointed to reported comments by astronauts, Duke among them, according to certain sources, suggesting that the decision to end Apollo was influenced by what the missions had found. Or rather, by what someone didn't want found. And the implication being that the moon wasn't as uninhabited or as geologically boring as the public was told, and that continuing to send humans there carried risks. Not physical risks, but informational risks. The risk that astronauts might see something or find something that couldn't be easily explained away. Is there evidence for this? Hard evidence? No, there is not. There are anecdotes. There are quotes of uncertain provenance. There are interpretations layered on top of interpretations layered on top of decades of retelling. But there is also a fact that is hard to ignore. It has been over 50 years since a human being walked on the moon. 50 years. In that time, we've built the International Space Station. We've sent robots to Mars. We've photographed black holes and detected gravitational waves. We've developed technology that would have seemed like magic to the Apollo engineers. And yet, we haven't gone back. The Artemis program promises to return humans to the moon. Maybe it will, but the repeated delays, the shifting timelines, the political football that lunar exploration has become. It's hard not to notice that for all our technological progress, there seems to be a strange reluctance to actually send people back to the surface. Maybe that reluctance is purely practical. Sending humans to the moon is staggeringly expensive, even by modern standards. It's dangerous. The political will has to be sustained across multiple administrations. There are 1,000 mundane reasons why it hasn't happened yet. Or maybe, just maybe, there's a conversation happening behind closed doors that we're not privy to. A conversation about what Apollo found, what it means, and whether humanity is ready to confront it. I'm not telling you that's the case. I'm telling you that the question exists, and it won't go away. Silence, memory, and myth. There's something that happens to stories when they age. They don't just get older, they get bigger. A fisherman catches a large bass. He tells the story at dinner. By the next week, it's the biggest bass anyone in the county has ever seen. By the next year, it was practically a shark. He's not lying. He's not even exaggerating, not consciously. He's doing what human brains do. He's compressing, dramatizing, and mythologizing. He's turning memory into narrative. And narrative, by its nature, selects for the dramatic. The same thing has happened to the Apollo stories. And I say this not to diminish them, but to put them in the context they deserve. Charles Duke is now in his late 80s. He has lived an extraordinary life, not just the moon, but decades of service, faith, family, and reflection. Like all of us, his memories have evolved. The things that seemed routine in 1972 may now seem more significant. The things that were unexplained then remain unexplained now. But the weight of that mystery has only grown with time. And around those memories, a mythology has formed. Not necessarily created by Duke himself, but by the vast ecosystem of documentarians, writers, conspiracy theorists, and curious people who have taken his words, and the words of other astronauts, and built something larger. Something that may or may not reflect what was originally meant. This is how myths are born, not from lies, not from delusion, but from the perfectly natural human process of trying to make sense of experiences that exceed our ability to explain them. Think about what it means to walk on the moon. Really think about it. You are standing on a world that is not your own. The ground beneath your feet has never been touched by rain, by wind, by any living thing. The silence is absolute. The loneliness is cosmic. You are the most isolated human being who has ever existed, separated from every other member of your species by 250,000 miles of empty space. And you look up, and you see Earth, and it's small, fragile, a blue marble hanging in an infinite black void. And in that moment, something shifts inside you, something that you will spend the rest of your life trying to articulate but never quite can. Many astronauts have described this, the overview effect, a cognitive shift that occurs when you see Earth from space, a sudden, overwhelming sense of the planet's fragility and the arbitrary nature of the borders and conflicts that define life on its surface. But some astronauts have described something else too, something deeper and more difficult to name, a feeling that the universe is not empty, that the vast, silent spaces between worlds are not as vacant as they appear, that the moon itself carries some quality, not sentient, maybe not even physical, but present, watchful, waiting. Is this mysticism? Maybe. Is it the natural psychological response of a human brain confronted with an experience it was never designed to process? Almost certainly. Is it possible that it's something more? That's something we don't yet have the language or the science to describe? That's the question, isn't it? And it's a question that Charles Duke and every astronaut who walked on the moon carries with them, not as a burden, not as a secret, but as a mystery. A genuine, unresolved, deeply human mystery that no amount of debunking or speculation can fully address. Because at the end of the day, 12 men walked on the moon. 12. In all of human history. And what they experienced, really experienced, beyond the mission reports and press conferences and carefully managed public narratives, belongs to them. The rest of us can only listen and wonder and ask. So here we are, not at the end, but at the edge. Charles Moss Duke Jr. walked on the moon. That is history. The missions ended. That was policy. But the questions were never formally closed. 6 landings, a few fleeting hours on the surface, and then a silence that has lasted decades. Maybe we found nothing. Maybe we found exactly what we expected. Or maybe the most important discoveries are the ones that never make headlines. The moon still circles above us, unchanged, patient, watching. And when we finally return, not just to visit, but to remain, will we discover something new or confront something that has been there all along?